Hi, everyone. Welcome. We are going to be starting the program in just a moment. Art Wilcox, who's the Vice President of the Coronado Historical Association, will be leading us off. We're just going to let people into the waiting room for a moment.
Thank you for joining us for the Virtual Historic Preservation Symposium. We will begin in just a couple of minutes, so please get settled and get ready for the start of the program.
Had to read that.
Huh?
He was reading that. What are you doing? Right?
I'm looking at who's in the. I guess we don't have video.
You know.
Kathy McDonald.
Start video. I think it's a start video.
Maybe I should go to sound.
Meeting is now streaming live on Facebook.
Welcome to the 2021 Historic Preservation Symposium. My name is Art Wilcox, and I'm the Vice President of the Coronado Historical Association. I chair CHA's Heritage Team, which is the committee that oversees the GEM Award. Thank you for joining us for this year's Preservation Symposium. Throughout the program, please feel free to write any questions you may have in the chat box. Our staff will collect them and read them at the end. After the presentation, you are welcome to stay on to ask questions as well. We are thrilled to host another Preservation Symposium in celebration of National Preservation Month. Communities all around the country are celebrating their unique heritage, and we're proud to celebrate Coronado's preservation and history. The symposium is an annual tradition which is hosted in partnership with the Coronado Historical Association, the City of Coronado, and Coronado Main Street. On behalf of CHA's Board of Directors, I would like to specifically thank the new Executive Director of Coronado Main Street, Liz Reby. In addition to continuing the Coronado Main Street Partnership for Preservation Month, Liz served on the GEM committee this year. We'd also like to thank Island Pasta and Costa Azul for supporting this program by offering a special deal to visual attendees. Thank you to all of our partners for making this event a success. Before we begin, I would like to take the time to honor the legacy of Senator James Mills. Senator Mills served for 22 years as a state assembly member and state senator. One of his greatest accomplishments was the creation of the Millsack, which protects historic homes by incentivizing preservation through a reduction in property taxes. The Mills Act has helped preserve thousands of historic residential and commercial properties, including many properties in Coronado. Senator Mills was a longtime Coronado resident, and his contributions to historic preservation will be long remembered. Now I would like to introduce our first speaker, Trisha Olsen. Trisha has over 15 years of experience in the field of historic preservation in the San Diego region. She holds dual bachelor's degrees in history and architectural history from the University of California at Santa Barbara, a Master of City Planning degree from San Diego State University, and is certified as a professional planner by the American Planning Association's Institute of Certified Planners. She has worked as a historic research consultant, as a historic preservation planner for the cities of San Diego and Coronado, and currently manages the City of Coronado's Historic Preservation and Millsack programs. Welcome, Trisha.
Thank you so much. And thanks to CHA for arranging this virtual symposium once again. It's great to be here for, I don't know, the 7th or 8th year that we've done this. It's been a long time. So I'm Trisha Olsen. I am the City of Coronado's Historic Preservation Planner, and I'm going to talk with you just about some basics about our historic preservation program. I'm going to answer some frequently asked questions that Vicki gets over at CHA quite a bit that I'm hoping I can help some people get some answers to. And then also, as Art said, please do put any questions you have in the chat box and we will address those as well. And I'll also give my contact information if you want to email me some questions to have answered offline. All right, so first, what is a historic resource? At the basic level, a historic resource is a building, structure, object, or site that has been evaluated by the City of Coronado under the Determination of Historic Significance Review and determined to meet 2 or more of the city's adopted designation criteria. We have 4 main designation criteria: a special element of the city's history, an association with a historically significant person or event, an example of an architectural style that has not been substantially altered, or an example of a notable work of a building professional. So those are the main things that are evaluated when we look at properties that are going through the Determination of Historic Significance Review. Sorry. All right, I'm flying through my slides on accident here. You'll see 2 plaques around town that identify properties that have been recognized either by CHA or as a designated historic resource by the City of Coronado. And I know that there's some confusion about this, so this is a slide that I put together to hopefully help clear that up. If you have a rectangular plaque on your house, then your house was recognized at some point by the Coronado Historical Association back before the city had a historic preservation program. If you have this rectangular plaque, but not an oval plaque, it means your house has not been designated as a historic resource by the city. It's also not protected yet by the Historic Resource Code. It's not eligible for a Millsack, but it may be eligible for designation by the city. So it's a good idea to contact me if you're interested in that, and we can get you going on the Determination of Historic Significance review process. If you have the oval plaque that you see on the bottom of the screen, that means your property has been designated as a historic resource by the City of Coronado. One of the questions that we get a lot, I think Vicki gets this at CHA and I get it all the time at the planning counter as well, is what changes can you make to your house if it's designated as a historic resource? That's a really, really big ball of string that takes a lot of talking and a lot of looking at what you might have planned to answer. So what I'm going to say is that the basics are, in order to be approved, a modification to a historic resource has to comply with the Secretary of the Interior standards, treatment for historic properties. And we look mostly at the rehabilitation standards. There is a link to those on our historic preservation website. So you can take a look at those. They're pretty, you know, they're pretty easy to understand, but the interpretation can get a little bit wacky. And it's also a little bit objective. So I do recommend, if you have an idea of something that you want to do to your property, setting up an appointment to meet with me or talk with me over the phone or even over Zoom, and we can look at what you have planned and talk about whether or not it might comply with the Secretary of the Interior standards. And if you have a Mills Act agreement, we also need to look at whether or not it will comply with the city's alteration guidelines for Mills Act properties. So one of the benefits of historic designation is that if you have historic designation, you can apply for use of the historic building code, a reduction in building permit fees by the city, and then you're also eligible to apply for relief from some zoning regulations and also the Mills Act. There's more benefits, and you can find those in the Historic Resource Code of the Coronado Municipal Code, and that's linked on our website. The pictures that you see here are an example of a property that utilized the zoning exception requests for setbacks in order to achieve a small addition on their property and also to restore it to its original condition. So this property is located on D and Palm Avenues. The photo you see on the left is a historic photograph, and then 2014 you can see that it had undergone some modifications over time. And in 2016 they did a great project. They gained a little bit of square footage and also restored the property to its historic condition. And this property is interesting. It's actually a duplex. So there's one side of it fronts on Palm and one side of it fronts on D. So I encourage you to go by and take a look at it if you get a chance. It's one of my favorites in town. The Mills Act agreement is another benefit of historic designation that we get questions about a lot. This provides a tax benefit in exchange for preservation and often restoration of your historic resource. It's available to owners of historic resources in residential zones. The Mills Act is a 10-year contract. It's renewed annually, and it stays with the property, not the property owner. So if you have the Mills Act on your property and you sell your home, that property tax, the ability to have that property tax reduction stays with your property, but it does change under new ownership. The Mills Act agreement does require compliance with the Secretary of the Interior standards and the city's alteration guidelines for Mills Act properties. And you should be aware that the property tax savings is limited in Coronado. You cannot save more than 50% of what your property taxes would be if you didn't have Prop 13 benefits. Another question we get a lot is, if I have Prop 13, will my property taxes go up if I get a Mills Act? And the answer to that is no. If your Prop 13 taxes are lower than what you would receive with a Mills Act agreement, then the county tax assessor continues to assess your property under Proposition 13. Another question we get a lot is, does the Mills Act affect your property tax value? And it can. I mean, I feel like a lot of people come in when they have a historic resource, if they haven't previously gotten a Mills Act in place, in order to get one in place before they sell their home, because what new property owner wouldn't want a discount on their property taxes? You can apply for the Mills Act agreement at City Hall. We have the application on our website, and I will talk a little bit about how to obtain applications in just a bit. So this is just a brief look at what our website looks like currently. You can see that we have some information on where we're at with the COVID situation. I'm currently in the office 3 days a week and remote 2 days a week. So I do recommend that if you want to meet with me or have a phone conversation with me, shoot me an email and we'll set something up so we can ensure that I'm in the office on the day that you want to meet in person. Or if I'm remote, we can set up a teleconference via Zoom. And you can see that we also have links here to 2 helpful booklets. The Designation Criteria Guidelines is the pinkish red booklet there that you see, and the other one is the City's Historic Preservation Program Guidebook. These are really helpful if you want to get familiar with our program. You'll definitely want to give the Historic Preservation Program Guide a read if you are considering applying for a determination of historic significance, or if you have questions about historic alteration permits or the Mills Act. It gives you some basic information, and then I can always help you out with more specific questions if you have them as well. The designation criteria guidelines are very helpful in determining whether, if you're kind of on the fence on, you're not sure if your property qualifies, you kind of want to figure it out for yourself a little bit before applying, you can give those designation criteria guidelines a read, and you might be able to, get a little bit of an idea of whether your property would meet the criteria for designation. Excuse me. Below those, we have links to applications. The determination of historic significance heading has our determination of historic significance application, as well as links to the searchable register of historic resources and the searchable list of properties that have been determined to be non-historic. So if you recently purchased your property and you're not sure if it's listed or if it's been reviewed, you can search those 2 PDFs by address and see if it's been designated or if it's non-historic. If it's not on either of those lists, it means it hasn't been reviewed. We have headings for our historic alteration permits as well as our Mills Act agreement. The applications are in place there as well. We also have links to the Secretary of the Interior standards treatment for historic properties, as well as a searchable list of properties that have Mills Act agreements. Because some of our properties that are designated as historic resources don't yet have Mills Act agreements, you can search your address in that list to be sure. We also have a map on our website that's kind of fun to play with. You can see all of those little blue pins there are designated historic resources in the city of Coronado. you can, I don't have the ability to zoom in on it here because it's just a slide, but if you were to play with this on our website, you could zoom in, you can click on the pins and see photographs and read about each historic resource. So it's a fun way to get familiar with the properties that are designated in the city of Coronado. So that's my brief but spectacular presentation on our city's historic preservation program. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box or send them to me via email. My email address is right there on the screen. My first initial T, last name Olsen with an E @coronado.ca.us. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Trisha. This has been really helpful and enlightening to learn more about the city's historic preservation program. We do have a few short questions for you. One is, how long is the Millsack waiting list? Because in the past it has been very long.
Yeah, good question. We don't have a waiting list. So the city council cleared the waiting list, I think 2 years ago. And since then they have been reviewing and approving all of the properties that have come in a previous calendar year. So the way that it works is at the end of each calendar year, all of the Mills Act applications that have been submitted during that year and reviewed by the Historic Resource Commission go on a waiting list, but it's not really a waiting list because the following year, the city council looks at the whole thing. They don't just look at a portion of it. Of course, the number of properties that get approved is always at the city council's discretion. So they may decide in any given year that the city isn't ready to approve all of the applications that were received in the previous calendar year, but they haven't done that in the last couple years.
That's great to hear. So we also had a question about how long does the process take usually from the application to going through a hearing date?
For determination of historic significance?
Yes.
Okay, so that process takes about 3 months. Once you submit an application, I send off the application to one of our third-party historic consultants and they prepare a historic research report. That takes the longest time. It's about 8 weeks right now in a turnaround time. And then pretty quickly after that report gets back to us, we get you scheduled for the Historic Resource Commission. Just depending on the timing, it could be 2 to 3 weeks or it could be 4 weeks.
Great. And our last question is, could you tell us a little bit about the historic context statement and the survey that's underway? What's the progress with that?
Yes, so that is underway. We got a little bit set back because of COVID, like everything else in the world, but we have had our consultant out in the field. They've been surveying some properties. We also had a setback because we had data from the county tax assessor that didn't accurately show built dates. So staff, i.e. me and 2 other planners, had to go through all of our building permits and put all of the built dates in a giant spreadsheet and get that to our consultant so that we could accurately determine what properties needed to be surveyed. And that took an extra 2 or 3 months. So we got set back quite a bit on the data collection part and then because of COVID, but we are making some headway and we expect to have our context statement ready for an update and review in August of this year.
Oh, great. Fantastic. Well, thank you, Trisha. If anybody else has questions for Trisha about the city's program and how it works, you can certainly email her or stay on at the end of the program to ask her questions. And Trisha, if you'll just stop sharing your screen for
Yep.
now.
Thank you.
And Claudia? All right, you can go ahead whenever you're ready.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Claudia Gallant, and I am a very proud board member of CHA, and I also chair the Education Committee. It's my truly true pleasure this evening to announce the Coronado Historical Association's Intern of the Year Award for the 2020-2021 school year. This year, our recipient is Paloma Ronas von Helms. As you can see in the slide, Paloma started with CHA as a junior in the CHS, CHS and CHA are very similar. CHS Coronado High School internship program in the fall of 2019, helping to conduct the Coffee and Conversations program. That program is a monthly group that looks at oral history interviews, that project, where students talk with Coronado residents on various topics to include in our CHA archives. The interviews become a collection of stories that are transcribed and live on as evidence of our rich history. After the spring 2020 semester ended last year, Paloma approached us wishing to do a few interviews of the community members in the LGBTQ community here in Coronado who attended Coronado High School. Her passion for this project was immediate, as she committed herself fully to the interview process, from crafting incredibly thoughtful and tailored interview questions to meticulously transcribing hours of audio recordings. Paloma has helped ensure that this important community is included as part of our greater Coronado story. A graduating senior, Paloma will be attending Stanford in the fall. So welcome to everybody, and I hope you join me in congratulating Paloma. Now I will turn it over to CHA's board president, our Dave Landon.
Dave, you're on mute.
Sorry, let me start over. It is my pleasure to announce this year's GEM Award. The annual GEM Award is truly a community award. It has been awarded to locals since 2013. The GEM, which stands for Going the Extra Mile, is an award that recognizes a homeowner's commitment to preserve and restore rather than replace an historical home, contributing to Coronado's unique and architecturally rich environment. Each year, the GEM Committee considers historic homes and properties that have been nominated by CHA's membership. GEM Award finalists must have completed a recent restoration or renovation project true to the historic character of the home by December 31st of the prior year. This year included a fantastic slate of finalists. This has been one of our most competitive years ever. This year's finalists include 1011 G Avenue, Jane and Doug Brandt, 547 A Avenue, Taylor and Ann Stockdale, 1127 F Avenue, Brian and Shannon Mariotti, 535 Ocean Boulevard, Scott Riddle and Lisa Shields, 545 Boulevard, Ocean Boulevard, Deborah and Cannon and Colleen Winter, 532 Marina Avenue, Jim and Kathleen Stengel, and also a shout out to them. Today is their wedding anniversary, so happy anniversary. 855 Alameda Boulevard, James and Marianne Huntsman. The GEM Committee researches the history and takes a bike tour by each home before making its selection. Throughout the month, CHA has been highlighting the history of each of the finalists in articles in the Eagle Journal and the Coronado News. I'd like to give a big thank you to Mary Farley for chairing the GEM Committee this year, and to all of the committee members, Bruce and Deborah Linder, Beth Fleming, Liz Reby, Chandler and Jamie Tico Burgos, and Russ Haley, and Jamie Jameson, Kevin and Caroline Ashley, and Paul and Karen Laidline. Thank you all so much for serving on the committee and for your commitment in helping to preserve Coronado's architectural heritage. And with that, I am pleased to announce that this year's GEM Award is 547 A Avenue, Taylor and Ann Stockdale. The Craftsman Cottage was built in 1910 during Jim Stockdale's deployment to Westpac in 1963. His wife, Sybil Stockdale, bought the house on E Avenue. In 1964, Jim again deployed to Westpac as the commanding officer of Fighter Squadron 51 aboard the aircraft carrier USS Ticonderoga, leaving the family quietly settled on 547A. Following his safe return home after being a POW during the Vietnam War in 1973, Vice Admiral Stockdale was assigned to head an aviation warfare command with an office at NAS North Allen. He was offered spacious quarters aboard North Allen, but declined so his family could stay in their beloved home on A Avenue. After the passing of Sybil in 2015, this beloved and well-lived-in home was indeed in need of some love and repair. Taylor Stockdale, the youngest of the 4 Stockdale sons, and his wife Anne were gratefully able to keep the house in the family. For the last few years, Taylor and Anne have worked diligently and passionately to bring the home back to life, including repairing the crumbling foundation. Their work truly went the extra mile. Congratulations to Taylor and Anne. The Stockdales could not join us tonight, but we have a short video to share with them where they discuss the extensive repairs undertaken to bring the home back to its former glory.
Give us just a moment, folks. I'm going to be turning the audio sound on through my computer. All right, this should work.
I'm here today with Anne and Taylor Stockdale, this year's recipient of the GEM Award. And we've all seen the history that's been matters, but I thought it'd be interesting to back to its also I want to thank you both. This has really become a focal place.
Well, it seems we're having some audio issues, and so I think we're going to move on with the program, but we will be sure to share this video on our website as well as this whole program, so you can come back and listen to the message that the Stockdales have. And we'll also have it on Facebook as well. So we'll send you links to be able to view this video. And Dave, you're on mute again.
I am honored this evening to introduce our speaker, Scott Keys. Scott is the Chief of Heritage Documentation Programs at the National Park Service. The Heritage Documentation Programs, consisting of the Historic American Building Survey, the Historic American Engineering Record, and the Historic American Landscape Survey, conduct nationwide documentation of the country's historic properties. Documentation produced through the program is housed in the Library of Congress and constitutes the nation's largest archive of historic architecture, engineering, and landscape documentation. Prior to joining the National Park Service, Scott served as the Department of the Navy's chief technical expert on architectural history and historic preservation. He also previously worked as an historic architect at the Joint Base Pearl Harbor, Hickam, and as a designer at various architectural firms in Canada and the United Kingdom. A Secretary of the Interior qualified historian and architect, he received his Bachelor's of Arts in History from UCLA and Master of Architecture from the University of Toronto. Though currently living in Washington, D.C., Scott grew up in Coronado and graduated from Coronado High School. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Scott.
Hey, Dave. Thank you very much for having me. As Dave said, my name is Scott Keys. I'm the Chief of the Heritage Documentation Programs at the National Park Service. I'm also a proud Coronadan and a graduate of Coronado Elementary, Middle School, and High School. I'd like to think that growing up in a place like Coronado that's so rich in architectural history and diversity kind of inspired me down the career path I ended up taking. So I'm happy that you could join me. I'm happy to be talking to a bunch of people who also love Coronado and love historic preservation and history. So hopefully, I know since I was young, even in that span of time, we've lost a lot in Coronado, and Coronado has changed quite a bit. But I fully support all efforts to try and keep what's left of the historic fabric of the town. So with that, tonight, Trisha talked kind of about Coronado and local preservation, and I kind of wanted to pan out a little bit and talk about preservation at the federal level. My whole career has been as a historical architect working for various federal agencies. And I can talk a little bit about federal preservation programs and then talk specifically about the program that I run now, which is called the Heritage Documentation Programs, and it's part of the National Park Service. I'm trying to make that switch. There we go. So most people deal with preservation, I think, at a local level. The way that our laws are set up makes it so that most preservation happens either at the state or city level with planning commissions. And Trisha went over what Coronado's program looks like. That said, the federal government has a long history of being involved in preservation. And even though most citizens may not engage with the federal preservation programs directly, I think they set up the framework on which a lot of the local preservation programs are based. So when Trisha was talking about the Coronado Register of Historic Places, and it had various criteria on how something can be eligible for the register, those more or less mirror what the National Register does at the federal level. Tax credits at the state level, the Mills Act, there's a federal tax credit program as well. So even though you may be dealing with state or city laws, a lot of them have their basis in the federal laws that came first. So there's a lot of federal laws that govern historic preservation and cultural resource management. The biggest one by far is the National Historic Preservation Act. It was signed in 1966 by Lyndon Johnson. And here's a picture of him signing it. In 1965, Johnson convened a special committee on historic preservation, and they produced a report called "With Heritage So Rich," and it became a rallying cry for the preservation movement. this is a good fact about the program I run now, but up until that time, the Park Service's Historic American Building Survey had documented 12,000 places in the United States. By 1966, half of them had either been destroyed or damaged beyond repair. In the report, Heritage So Rich, the committee wrote that the Habs collection looked like a death mask of America. So I guess for a little context of what was going on in 1966 that made historic preservation finally come to the forefront and require legislation. Obviously, the late 50s and early 60s were a time of great prosperity in the United States. And with great prosperity often comes a lot of building and a lot of change. And those things started to happen and become more prevalent in the late 50s and early 60s. The pictures here on the screen are both of Penn, the old Penn Station in New York, which became kind of one of the rallying cries for a nascent preservation movement. As you can see, it was a gorgeous building, a Beaux-Arts building. And if anyone's been through Penn Station in the decades since, you will probably agree with me that it doesn't quite live up to this. So this combined with the expansion of the federal highway system, which was starting to blow through a lot of historic towns and neighborhoods, and urban revitalization, which was starting to erase some historic neighborhoods to build new things in their place. These things combined started a more populist preservation movement throughout the country. And ended with the creation of the National Historic Preservation Act. So I guess what does that act do? Because it's kind of the basis of all federal preservation programs. One part of the act, as you heard during my bio, I used to work for the Navy, and a lot of people may think, why is the Navy employing historical architects? What's it doing kind of in preservation? But the National Historic Preservation Act actually sets up a requirement for all federal agencies to be custodians of the historic properties under their control. As you can see here on the right, that's obviously the USS Arizona at Pearl Harbor. And on the bottom there is the water tower at Hickam Field, which is the old Air Force base, which is adjacent to Pearl Harbor. So as a historic architect working at Pearl Harbor and then later in Washington, D.C. for the Navy in general, we are custodians for over 3,000 historic resources. At Pearl Harbor is one of the largest national historic landmarks in the country, with over 400 contributing resources in it. So behind the scenes, all the federal agencies, whether it's the Navy or anyone, NASA, NOAA, the Fish and Wildlife Service, everyone has a responsibility to preserve historic properties under their management and control. And it's not just military properties. If you see here, some of you might recognize that as North Island. On the bottom of the screen, you can see the Bertram Goodhue complex, which is at the center of the historical part of that base. Bertram Goodhue is the architect that also did large parts of Balboa Park, the Nebraska State Capitol, Honolulu Museum of Art, and a lot of other kind of notable buildings from the early 1900s. We also had to preserve things that were not Navy buildings at all. So things that the Navy became custodians of after they became military bases. Here on the right are pictures of Little Petroglyph Canyon at Weapons Station China Lake in California. It's one of the largest collections of petroglyphs and native rock art in the United States, and is now the Navy's requirement to manage it. Likewise, this here is the Emancipation Grove at Camp Saxton in Buford, South Carolina. It was an old plantation site and then became a camp during the Civil War for a African-American freed regiment. It was the site of one of the first readings of the Emancipation Proclamation. And now it's part of Naval Hospital Buford. So there's a wide range of things that you deal with working for a federal agency that you probably would not think if you were not employed in preservation. So that's one side of it. The side that most people deal more with is probably the outward facing parts of federal preservation programs. And those are generally managed by the National Park Service, which is where I work now. So obviously the Park Service has a lot of national parks with amazing historical resources, whether it's battlefields, colonial buildings, what have you. But the law also requires the Park Service to establish various things that are outward facing that the public relies on for preservation. So those are things like the National Register of Historic Places, the development of the Secretary of Interior standards, which we talked about earlier in Trisha's presentation. Also the tax credit program, various tribal things like administering NAGPRA, which is the Native American Graves Repatriation Act. And then kind of attached onto that is the program that I run for the National Park Service. And so that is called the Heritage Documentation Programs. It's comprised of 3 different programs, and they're called the Historic American Building Survey, or HABS, the Historic American Engineering Record, or HARE, which also does ships, not just bridges or factories and things like that, and the Historic American Landscape Survey, or HALS. So these are also stipulated in the National Historic Preservation Act, as is everything else. Various parts of the act require the Secretary of the Interior to create regulations to create a collection of historic architecture and engineering records in the Library of Congress. It also requires each federal agency to make sure that before they substantially alter or demolish a historic property, that they record it and submit it into this collection. So the heritage documentation programs are the part of the National Park Service that administers this in conjunction with the Library of Congress. And these are just pictures of the standards that we put out. So if there's the Secretary of Interior standards that we were talking about for rehabilitation, these are the standards for documentation that we control and update. So HABS was founded in 1933. It is actually the oldest preservation program in the United States, or federal preservation program in the United States. There's a little quote here from the original proposal. It says, "Our architectural heritage of buildings from the last 4 centuries diminishes at an alarming rate. It is the responsibility of the American people that if the great number of our antique buildings must disappear through economic causes, they should not pass into unrecorded oblivion." So during the Depression, this was actually a make-work program for out-of-work architects through the WPA. It was intended to last only for a summer, but the response was so great that they kept it going, and it's still going today, obviously. So there's some pictures in 1934 of HABS architects recording the Louisville School for the Blind. What made HABS interesting, I think, is that it focused on all types of buildings. So not just the most important or grandest, but it really started focusing for one of the first times on vernacular architecture as well. You can see pictures here of New Mexico pueblos, old gold mining buildings from Nevada. And then on the bottom, you have an old plantation house and the sharecropper's cottage. So a lot of this stuff is now gone, but in 1933 it was already disappearing. So it started to kind of broaden the view of what was historic and what was worth documenting and saving. These are examples of some of the first drawings from the early 1930s. As you can see, they kind of have an antiquated pattern book look to them. So these groups of architects were just roving around the country, finding historic buildings and drawing them and taking photographs of them, which we don't rove around the country as much anymore, but still more or less the same process. So now we've obviously been around a long time. There's actually 45,979 sites documented in the Library of Congress so far. That includes over 66,000 drawings, over 300,000 photographs, and over 200,000 pages of history. There's actually so many documents now that they had to build this special storage space at Fort Meade to store it all. It kind of looks like the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark or something like that. So what goes into the documentation that Habs, Hare, and Howes produce? It's 3 main components, and they haven't changed since 1933. And this is Balboa Park, obviously. So it's large format photography, measured drawings, and a written history. There's lesser levels, so you can only do photographs in a history, but kind of the classic documentation is these 3 things. So this is an old documentation of, I think, the House of Hospitality at Balboa Park. There we go. There's a lot of low-tech things that go into it. Into field measurement, that's the first thing you have to do is go out into the site and start measuring things. As you can see, here's an old picture of folks measuring things in either the 50s or 60s. And here's a recent picture of one of our guys measuring a fireplace a few years ago, and they're doing the exact same thing. It's also sometimes a little difficult to measure some things, as you can imagine, when you're talking about large buildings. So here is the World War I memorial on the Mall at Washington, D.C. with trying to get high up there, also going down and using fall protection gear to go onto the trusses of an old railway bridge. Very exciting things sometimes. And as you can see, also, they used to have these problems in the 30s and 40s as well. And sometimes that does put you in pretty interesting positions when you're trying to measure things. So here's someone who has had to scale up onto Abraham Lincoln in order for the documentation of the Lincoln Memorial. And so once you do the measurements, you end up with sketch plans. And over the decades, they've developed a kind of methodology for creating them using 1/8 inch graph paper and using red and black ink, red for the dimensions, black for the wall. So this is what a standard sketch plan would look like if you have a team of architects out measuring a building. Sometimes if your buildings are really complicated, that can kind of be a nightmare, as this guy in some building with Cabbage Patch dolls behind him. Seems like he's about to have a breakdown. Other times, you can be all cool and collected like these guys in the 60s, just drafting away in the corner of the main historic building survey. And in the end, after you do sketch plans, that is all so that you can make final drawings. And these are the drawings that are submitted into the Library of Congress. These can take any kind of form, so they can be plans, sections, elevations, also things for more complicated subjects like isometrics. Like the one on the left is an exploded isometric for a ship hull. The one on the right is the reflected ceiling plan of the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C. The second thing that you have to do is large format photography, and this is basically key to all of the documentation. It's the easiest way to convey a building quickly. It has to be large format so that it can be submitted into the Library of Congress, and it's of archival quality. So large format does not mean that the picture is large. It's actually the negative. So the negative will be 4 by 5 inches, 8 by 10 inches, or 5 by 7 inches. This is a picture from the 60s of someone using one of these cameras. And this is on the right, a recent picture from Iolani Palace of a camera. As you can see, they haven't changed much. I remember the first Habs project that I was part of in Pearl Harbor. I was pretty new to preservation. I'd never seen this, and this guy came out and stuck his head under the drape behind it, and I did not know that those things still exist, but they do. And we have photographers on staff that are very proficient at taking these types of photography. The other thing is it's not digital, and the prints cost a lot. So you have to be very careful about your lighting and knowing what you're taking a picture of, especially because you're usually traveling somewhere. So you have no idea what it's going to look like until you get back to Washington, D.C. The other thing about the photography is these cameras allow you to correct perspective. So if you see on the right here, this is the hotel at Yosemite. As you can see, the perspective, it kind of cants things in. That's just naturally how you look. For documentation purposes, you need to perspective correct. So if you watch this photo now, see what the perspective corrected version looks like. There it is. So this is when they take the camera, when they take the pictures, they actually have knobs and they will correct the perspective with the camera viewfinder before they take the picture. And so that in the end, you get these beautiful kind of straight orthogonal photos, which get submitted into the Library of Congress. Those are a lot of old-fashioned techniques. I would say we still do them, but we have moved very rapidly into the 21st century. The major thing, or major technological advancement, which has made life a lot easier in some ways, is the invention of the laser scanner. As you can see here on the right, there's Habs architects setting up a laser scanner at the Statue of Liberty, or on the left, and on the right, you can see an initial scan of the Statue of Liberty on the right. Laser scanning is good, especially for complex or very large things like the Statue of Liberty, or even things which maybe aren't that complex but have very complicated geometry, such as the birdcage at the National Zoo in Washington, D.C. If you can imagine trying to measure out those curves and draw that just by hand, it would be a lot more difficult. However, when you're doing laser scanning, you can create these three-dimensional scans that can then be created into raster images or vector lines so that you can get the geometry a lot easier. So how does a laser scanner work? I will allow someone who understands it much better than me explain it to you in this video, and hopefully you guys can hear it.
A laser scanner emits a rapidly pulsing or continuous laser beam. As it emits the beam, the scanner automatically rotates around its vertical axis, and a rapidly spinning or oscillating mirror also moves the beam up and down. The result is a systematic sweeping of the beam over the area. When the beam hits an object, some of its energy bounces back to the scanner, where if the returned energy signal is strong enough, a sensor detects it, and the timer uses it to calculate the distance from the scanner to the object. For each distance measurement, additional critical data is recorded, including the corresponding horizontal angle of the rotating laser and the corresponding vertical angle of the moving mirror. The scanner automatically combines these to calculate a 3D X, Y, and Z coordinate position for each point. The resulting scan is a set of 3D coordinate measurements.
It's a detailed 3D representation of the scene, often called a point cloud.
And to add realistic texture or color to scans, matching photos can be taken.
All right, so I hope everyone got that. Oh, there we go. And so we use the laser scanners and then can modify the information that comes out of them to finally come up with archival drawings. So here is the Statue of Liberty again. On the left, you can see a point cloud. Next to that, you can see a mesh model that is generated from that point cloud. Next to that, you can see an AutoCAD line drawing, which traces the major lines of that model. And then on the right, you can see the finished product, which is a perfect recordation of the Statue of Liberty in something that would have been impossible to do 20 years ago. So I'll take you through a laser scanning project really quickly to show you how it goes from just being in the field to making drawings, which get submitted into the Library of Congress. This is a project at Santa Susana in California, as a NASA test facility where they did rocket testing on these large structures that you can see in the picture. You can see this here. This is the point cloud. So in order to document a site, you have to put laser scanners in various places strategically so that you have full coverage. The information that comes back, so this is a plan of the site. The information that comes back shows different colors, kind of yellows and reds. And that's just, it reflects how strong lasers that's coming back to the scanner. So if things are more reflective, like man-made objects, they'll come back whiter, or if things are closer, they come back whiter, and if they're farther away or less reflective, like mountains and rocks, they come back as red. So that's not actually very helpful if you want to use that data to know what you're looking at later. Also, I should put this in here too, weather conditions can also effect doing laser scanning, so they can affect those point clouds. If there's wind or rain, it can affect the way that the lasers come back to the scanner. To kind of fix this, you can do a thing called Panophotography, which is you do the laser scan and then you take the scanner off and put a digital camera in the exact same place as the laser scanner and then rotate that around. It creates this kind of three-dimensional spherical photo that you see on the right, kind of like Google Street View. And then you can use that to make a color that corresponds to each pixel in the point cloud. So this is that model that we saw the point cloud of. Once you put the camera on, you can just pan through the model here and you can see what the data that the laser scanner picks up once you put the color pixels onto each point that's coming back. And so this is obviously that same site, the NASA site in California. You can also see, while this pans around, places where the laser scanner was so close to the road are a lot denser, just because there's better coverage. Depending on how much information you need, you can put less, you can spend less time on things that are more peripheral. As you can see by how large and complex these are, they'd be incredibly hard to document by hand, just based on either getting up onto various parts of the structure. And just the amount of structural trusses and other steel work that's involved in these. Great. So once you get that back, that's not the end though. Unfortunately, that, although you can see what it is, it's also still kind of hard to work with to create orthogonal or two-dimensional drawings from. So you can create these 3D solid or mesh models, which are editable in AutoCAD, which is a computer drafting software. And once you have the mesh model, then you can come up with the final product. So these are some of the final drawings of these test stands, which are submitted in the Library of Congress. You can see plans, a section or an elevation, and then this beautiful isometric perspective drawing on the right. Another technology that we use is called photogrammetry. So photogrammetry works where you just take a bunch of photos of an object. It works better for small things. And those blue things in this animation are all the photos that we're taking of the object. And there's software which can compare color pixels and actually generate a 3D model of the object. So this is the base of a flagpole in one of the American cemeteries in France from World War I. And so just from taking photos, you can actually get a fully measured 3D model. And from that 3D model, you can again make archival drawings, which can be submitted into the Library of Congress. This is a drawing which was created using that photogrammetric model as a base. And it really works well for things like bas reliefs and other things, or capitals on columns, things with a lot of details that are not too, that are kind of shallow. So here's another, this is a capitol at the National Zoo on the Reptile House. Obviously this would be almost impossible to record by hand, but by taking pictures of it and using this software, you can come up with this Romanesque, kind of weird Romanesque capitol, and you can draw it from that. Obviously, the main point of why we're doing this is to create documentation which can go into the Library of Congress. However, we're producing so much digital information while we do it that it can have other uses as well, especially in COVID times. The amount of virtual exhibits or tours that you can create from either the 3D scanned or the panophotography is an added bonus. So we've been doing this for a lot of national parks lately. This is again the Statue of Liberty. So this is, and you can go on the Statue of Liberty website of the national park and do this yourself. It's a virtual tour that allows you to tour all around Ellis Island and go into places that you could obviously never go in as a normal visitor, even if you were allowed there right now. So this is the ladder climbing up the arm of the Statue of Liberty. Using this technology, you could go and could climb up the arm on the website now, and you can end up in the actual torch. So a fun fact is that people were actually allowed to do this up until 1916. But after that, you were no longer allowed to climb up that gigantic ladder into the torch, probably for safety reasons or something like that, I'm sure. But there's the website. You can go and you can take a tour of Ellis Island yourself. And this is all just done with the digital data that we're generating to create these drawings. You can also do interactive 3D models. Let's see if this works. So this is the USS Cairo, which was one of the ironclad Civil War gunboats. They documented it as part of the engineering record. But in documenting it, you could use the laser scan point cloud to create an interactive model that people can pan around or go on these fly-throughs. So it obviously allows you into parts of a wrecked ship that you would never be able to see otherwise. So you can see all of the framing and things of the hull. And even the guns inside. So we're starting to do a lot more of this. It's kind of called creative mitigation. If HABs, hair and hows are standard mitigation that people did when they were demolishing or altering a building, now we can allow them to have more creative interactive things as well. Because we have this technical expertise, we often share with other parts of the government, and sometimes that has led people on our staff to very interesting and unique places. This was a collaboration with the State Department Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs to document historic sites in Afghanistan. These are 11th and 12th century mosque minarets on the old Silk Road that are obviously in danger because they're in a war zone. So architects from our staff went out with State Department, US Army, and the Polish Army, who have an Army Corps of archaeologists, and local Afghans to help them document these sites. So you can see two of our architects there on the left. You can see the 3D scanned image there on the right of one of the minarets. These things are really beautiful, and obviously, again, something that you would not want to document by hand. So this is the whole minaret is covered in this kind of decorative calligraphy and pattern making. And the neat thing about doing these things in all of the projects that we do with the technology is it allows you to spread kind of STEM and technology to other people, right? So as part of this and working with the State Department, they worked with young Afghan architects and actually brought two of the architects over to Washington, DC for several months to work on the project and learn how to document things back in their own country. So this is them in Washington, DC, standing in front of some of the work that they worked on. And here's some of the final drawings that the Afghans made of their minarets. And hopefully now that they have some of the skills in order to do this at other sites that may be in peril in their own country. And so that's kind of what we do. To finish off, I thought it would be interesting to just do a little bit of San Diego focus for everyone, since this is probably what you guys are familiar with. The HABs, Hair and Hows has a long history of recording things in California and in San Diego. This is an early one of the mission, as you can tell by the state that the mission's in here. And it can really allow you to see kind of a glimpse into the past, what these buildings looked like in the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s. Similarly, here is the train station in downtown San Diego. You can see archival photos on the left of them constructing it. Another photo of it completed and them tearing down the old train station tower. And then kind of a lighter picture of the old gift shop in 1960 with these tigers and other things that you could buy before getting on the train. So it's interesting that it captures kind of the larger scale things, but also these kind of small details of buildings that you would otherwise be forgotten. Obviously, since I'm talking to the Coronado Historical Association, I'm happy to report that there are some things in Coronado which are in the Library of Congress. I'm sure you guys could guess what the one building would be if they were going to record anything in Coronado, and that's the Hotel Dell, which was recorded in 1971. This was the cover page that they made for it. So it has the last remaining extravagantly conceived seaside resort hotel in Southern California, and then goes on to tell a little bit about the history. Here's a plan that they made of the Dell at the time in 1971, and here is a section / elevation of the main tower and ballroom at the Dell. Here's some photos as well. You can see it actually doesn't look that much different. Now, that does. Besides the Dell, there's also Graham Memorial Church, which I believe was done by the same architect as the Dell. It's a smaller record, so just a photograph in history. I don't know if there's any drawings, but they haven't been digitized yet on the Library of Congress's website. And as I was talking about earlier, one of the interesting things about HABS is it doesn't just focus on the most important buildings, but it focuses on things which are still significant, but might be overlooked, so vernacular or minor constructions. And so tellingly, or kind of in the spirit of HABS, Hair and House, the thing with the most documentation on Coronado is this court of apartment bungalows that used to be on the corner of 7th and Orange Avenue. So you can see it there on the left. That's where the police station is today. To the right of that, you can see kind of the edge of the library, and then behind it, you can see the old Coronado High School when it was still standing. This was in the middle of the courtyard of this complex. Now, I don't know, I'm sure a lot of people here tonight actually remember this complex before they tore it down. Here's the back side of it. And also you can see the interiors too. So there's like amazing built-ins, the folding down desk. Also another amazing built-ins and the old leaded glass window and windows from the outside. And so, you know, without this kind of documentation, these kind of more humble structures, which were such a vital part of, you know, the landscape in Coronado for so many decades, would kind of be lost. Took me looking this up to even remember that these had existed at one time. You start to kind of forget changes that have even happened in your own lifetime. And here's some plans as well, some of them. Another interesting thing is that as part of the documentation, they often put in archival photos as well. So archival photos that might be in local archives can get submitted to the Library of Congress as well on large format negatives. So these ones I thought was pretty funny when I was looking it up. It says, original photographs in possession of the Coronado Historical Association. And so there was about 5 of these, and they are now in the Library of Congress with that note on them when you pull them up. And so talking about the Library of Congress, where did I get all these things? Anyone can browse the collection. It's free, it's copyright free, so it's in the public domain, so anyone can use any of the photographs for anything they want, to publish, to use, and however you don't need to get permission. This is the website here. You can just Google HABS Hair House Library of Congress, and this will come up. It's actually one of the most visited collections in the whole Library of Congress. It gets 800,000 visits a month. And you can just type in whatever you want. As you can see, I obviously took a screen capture when I was typing in the word Graham Memorial, and Graham Memorial Church pops up. You can also do it by city or state and things like that. So if you have any free time and you just want to explore the architecture of America, you can go in, put keywords or a place and just see what comes up. And it's very good is that we work really closely with the Library of Congress. They're very happy about getting to partner with us on this collection. It's one of their most popular collections, and they've been working really hard to digitize things. So not everything is digitized yet, but we're working to continuously digitize everything in the collection so that you can access it online, because as you saw from that storage unit, once you ship things off to an Army base, it's kind of hard to get them out quickly. You can also reach out. I've been talking a lot about the work that we do personally, but the collection takes documentation from anyone. We work to process it, usually through regional offices. So there's a lot of just associations which will document things on their own and submit them to the Library of Congress as long as they meet the Secretary of Interior standards. We're happy to help bring them into the collection. You can also, we do a lot of student intern work every summer. So if you know students that are interested in historic preservation or historical architecture, they can apply and actually go into field schools and go document things. And if anyone, if you're demolishing a building or have mitigation and need advice, that's part of our job, is to kind of provide that advice. So you can just Google historic documentation programs or Habs Hair House, or go to that website and see our website. There's my contact information. If you have any questions, that's also on the website. And specifically, if you have questions about documentation, you can also contact the National Park Service Regional Office. Your regional office, as part of California, is the San Francisco Regional Office. And there's the contact information for Christopher Johnson, who is the historian who primarily handles working with people to submit documentation. And so, everyone's available. If you ever have any questions or are interested in what we're doing, you can always reach out. So with that, that's the end of my presentation. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And thank you for allowing me to present on the work of our small, weird part of the government.
Thank you so much, Scott. This has seriously been so cool to see. And I know lots of people, not just me, are geeking out about all the things that you've been sharing. And we have lots of questions to get to. But before we do, I just want to say thank you so much for including the information about Babcock Court in your presentation, because it is truly a beloved place that is no longer here in Coronado. And actually, CHA started, we once had a little bungalow there, and one of the windows that you showed the picture of, we have one of those windows that are hanging in our current facility in our boardroom. And so anybody who comes by the offices sometime, either for a research appointment or just to say hi, be sure to come in and ask about that, and we'll show you. It's really beautiful, still painted to the original green color. So very, very cool. So our first question comes from Karen. She wanted to know, does Point Loma National Monument have historic military sites?
The Point Loma National Monument does have historic military sites?
That's the first, yeah.
I cannot answer that question definitively. I know that it has a historic cemetery up there, which I honestly, I don't know. I assume that there are historic sites. I know that that is historic, and there are things which are, eligible for the National Register that are up there. I bet Trisha might be able to answer that better than me.
Yeah, Trisha, do you know if it's on the San Diego Register at all?
I was just starting to type in the chat box. So it's also the same location as the Cabrillo National Monument down at the end there. So there's a lighthouse. I am not sure in terms of the military buildings on the site, whether or not any of those are designated. I don't believe they're on the San Diego Register. Whether or not there's any on the National Register, I'm not sure. I know that there's, and Scott might have more information about this, but I know there's also different levels of national recognition as well. The national monuments versus national historic landmarks. And I don't know which is which on the Point Loma base.
Can I say something? I'm Karen, the one that asked the question. There are bunkers there on in the park itself, or the monument itself, where you can go in and see what the military men had to look out on both the ocean side and going into the bay side during World War II, and that's what I was asking about, if that's considered historic and national. And then they also have areas where the guns were set up if ships came in, you know, from a foreign country and stuff like that. So I just wondered if that was considered, Scott, a national site, because it does have the bunkers and things like that. So that was my question.
So I would assume, as working in the Navy for 10 years, any kind of intact World War II defenses, I've never seen one that has not been determined eligible for the National Register. So I would assume that they are determined eligible for the National Register. Now, to be eligible for the National Register, it doesn't mean that you're necessarily of national importance or significance. You can have significance at the local level, the state level, or the national level. It doesn't change your protection under the law at all. So if something is locally significant for something that happened in Coronado, it is just as important under the law as something that is significant on the state or national level, as long as it's considered eligible for the National Register. But in my experience, any kind of World War II defensive structures that are intact are almost always considered eligible for the National Register. And if that is a landmark, or what is it, a national monument?
Yeah, national monument.
Yeah, if it's administered by the Park Service, which I'm not sure if it is, the Park Service is probably the most lenient on what it considers significant over other federal agencies. So I would assume that they are managing those things as historic resources.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I was a volunteer out there, and so certain days, certain Sundays, they would have men that served there, would talk about it and things like that. So I was just kind of curious about that. So.
Yeah, I almost guarantee that they're considered historic.
Thanks, Scott. It was great listening to you. I mean, I took so many notes, so thank you so much.
Well, I'm glad we could teach. Glad we could teach you a little bit about it. And you know, if you have any questions or anything.
Oh, I got your email. I got your phone number. I wrote it down.
It's publicly available, so I'm always there.
Thank you, and thank you for your service, also for doing this for us.
It's my pleasure. So.
Great, thank you, Karen. We had another question come in from Constance, who said, are the drawings that are made that you showed in your presentation, are they used to build the building throughout this process also? I'm assuming, and Constance, you can jump in if you want to clarify, but maybe she's talking about for restoration purposes?
Yes, yeah. So yeah, they're not traditionally used to build the buildings because the buildings are already constructed. So a lot of times there will be as-built drawings. So as-built drawings are kind of buildings that were or design drawings. So drawings that were drawn before the building was created. In old buildings, a lot of times the design drawings and what is actually was built are not a one-for-one. Like you can even see design drawings of like the Capitol in Washington, DC, and there's differences, right? So there's that. A lot of times you've lost the drawings as well. And so you need to have someone come in and give you what we call baseline documentation. So we do that for a lot of National Park Service sites, specifically older things that, you know, maybe vernacular architecture or things which there is not a very, you know, well curated stack of drawings throughout time. So we'll come in and we'll create baseline documentation, as Vicki was saying, for restoration or rehabilitation purposes. So it allows the park to know what's there. We can also just tell what's original, what's not, when you're spending so much time looking at a building. And it just allows you to have those on hand for when you're doing rehabilitations or renovations to a building. So yeah, Vicki was right. That's mainly how they're used, but we usually will draw them. If there's really good as-built drawings or design drawings and they're pretty accurate, sometimes all they'll do is take a photograph of those on the large format digital photography and then use that to create a kind of standardized. So they'll remeasure it and kind of adjust it in Photoshop and stuff and submit that instead. But usually this is for buildings that this doesn't exist, or things that are so important that's kind of just worth having a kind of clean slate drawing.
I was specifically asking that question when you were showing the photographs of the area in California that I think you said was used for by NASA.
Yeah.
I think, you know, and I mean, they're so intricate and everything, but I'm assuming when they were built, somebody had to draw it before they could build it. That, you know, something more recent, you know, not the really old things, but something more recent, that there would be as-built drawings. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So,
Great.
Yeah, they do.
Hi, Karen. Karen's my sister.
Oh, I'm glad you guys
Yeah.
can see each other virtually.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Thanks.
Yeah, sometimes, and I'm not sure what was going on there at NASA. A lot of times on those kind of industrial sites too, there'll be a lot of just kind of additions and things that happen over time as things change the technologies. I know on Navy bases, there's that a lot of times where you just kind of get this accrual of small changes over time. So whatever was there at the beginning will be, you know, 60% of what is there now.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for the question.
All right, our next question was, who is currently responsible for preservation of resources at the old Naval Training Station that is now Livery Station? And Trisha thankfully answered in the comments that it is on the City of San Diego register. Trisha, do you want to say anything more about that resource?
Let's see, it's been a long time since I worked there and worked with that resource, but yeah, the Liberty Station project it's overseen by the City of San Diego. So all of the new, you know, if a new building or business moves in, if a new business moves into an existing building there, the City of San Diego is the jurisdiction that oversees any modifications to buildings in association with people moving in, the adaptive reuse of buildings and that sort of thing.
Yeah, yeah, and when those transfer, so that's an old, obviously, Department of Navy property. So that was closed down as part of BRAC, which is the Base Realignment and Closure Act. And as part of that process, they entered into these large agreements under the federal process called Section 106, which is a consultation, and that basically sets up an agreement which dictates how preservation will be controlled going forward, and usually it will transfer to a state or city entity, which will take over preservation requirements for that. So it depends on different ones. But yeah, anytime a building leaves federal property, you kind of set up an agreement that says how those buildings will be protected going forward.
Great. Our next question is from Leslie, and she asks, will the new additions to the Hotel Dell be part of the historic package? And Trisha commented in the chat box a little bit about this, but maybe Trisha and or Scott, if you could chime in a little bit more about the Dell's current master plan and the HABS documentation that's happening as part of that.
Sure. So the current master plan is one that was approved, gosh, a decade ago, at least, before I was working in Coronado. So anything that's happening there now is already part of the package that was previously approved as part of their master plan. The HABS documentation that took place, I think it was a year or so ago, maybe 2 years ago, was for a couple of buildings that were determined to be non-contributing to the Hotel del Coronado district, essentially. And so they were documented for HABS before they were demolished.
I think I saw those.
Yeah, did you see
I think
those?
I saw them when I was doing my research. It was like a cold storage house.
Yeah, an ice house, and I can't remember what the other one was, but it was an ice house and something else. Actually, David Marshall, who I think spoke last year at this, his company Heritage did that HABS documentation.
Yeah, and so as I was saying, anyone, you know, most of our stuff comes in through contractors or other people that do it on behalf of cities and states. So yeah, that stuff's now in the Library of Congress.
Great, thank you, Trisha. We have another question from Mike, who says, is the La Valencia Hotel in La Jolla documented similar to the Hotel Dell?
I do not know off the top of my head, but you can go on the website and put in the name and find out pretty quickly. It's obviously not everything that is historic is documented yet, you know, one day, hopefully, but it kind of comes down to where the interest is, whether, you know, when people are going through consultation to change things on a building, that like a SHPO or a regulator, like a state historic preservation officer, is requesting that type of mitigation. So doing HABs documentation, it definitely doesn't happen. If the law says it's supposed to happen whenever there's federal agencies involved, that definitely is not complied with fully. So it's kind of hit or miss what has been documented and what hasn't. But you could definitely go on the website and check for that or any historic property in San Diego to see if it exists.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So we're just about out of time, so I just want to ask my own personal question real quick is, are there any plans right now for any of the 3D models to be used for alternate reality kinds of experiences?
We have a lot of techie people in our office, so as soon as they have a chance, I'm sure they'll be doing it. We are, as I said, especially with like the COVID pandemic, there's been a lot of interest in kind of creating 3D experiences for people that can't visit sites. Even without COVID, like I was talking to some Army people in Hawaii the other day, and you know, they said they had Native Hawaiian elders who can't reach this sacred spot in a valley, and we're thinking about, you know, coming up with some 3D thing so that people could still access that. So there's all kinds of different things. As the technology continues to improve, I'm sure the experiences will improve as well. And so I know there's like 3 or 4 people in my office that will, once they have the funding to get it and think that they can start using it, will be on board as soon as possible.
Super cool. That's exciting news. We're just about out of time, and so I'm going to share my screen one last time. And Art. I'll turn it over to you, Art.
I'm unmuted now, I think. Scott and Trisha, I wanted to thank you for just absolutely your fantastic presentations. Both of you are true experts in your field, and it's so great, I think, for the members of CHA as well as the other community members to hear from you and get your perspective on both the federal and the local historic resource laws that we're dealing with. And Scott in particular, I had no idea how extensive the work was that the Park Service was doing now across the country, particularly with this photogrammetry. That to me, that's going to be a tremendous benefit for the entire nation as you're doing this. So thank you. And for all of those of you who participated today, I want to thank you for joining us. If our speakers have any more time, we are really out of what we had allotted for time. But if there's anybody who has any, they have agreed to stay for a couple of extra minutes, and we'll unmute everyone as soon as I'm finished here, and you can ask questions. And if not, we will close down after that. But before we leave, I just want to really thank both Scott and Trisha for their presentations today, and also we want to give a special thanks to our partners, the City of Coronado and Coronado Main Street, for organizing this and helping to make this a successful event. And I just want to wish everyone a happy Preservation Month. So with that, I will turn it over to Vicki to open the door if there are any other questions for Scott or Trisha.
Thanks, Art. Yeah, anybody who wants to stay, we'll unmute you.
I guess I would like to say it was a very interesting, very informative, lots of notes I took tonight on sites to visit. So thank you very much, ladies, for your time and your effort on doing this.
Thanks so much, Karen. We're glad you could join us.
I'd just like to say that having grown up in Washington, D.C., I spent a lot of time at the LOC and have always found the staff there to be wonderful to work with and have access to things. I mean, I'm sure there's new protocols in place for obtaining documents, because of course there have been things that have been mysteriously, shall we say, disappeared out of the LOC. And if you ever have a chance to be in Washington, just walk in the building and take a look at this wonderful preservation building that holds every book and maps and photographs and anything you can believe. That it's really wonderful to just visit and see, because it's just part of our lives here, and it's been around since Thomas Jefferson donated all his books back in the early 1800s. So
I would second that. It's probably the most beautiful building in Washington, D.C. And every citizen of the country can get a library card.
Yep.
So if you're ever in Washington, D.C., they don't make it very easy to find where to get the library card. It's kind of like a labyrinth under there, but tough it out. You can get a library card, and then you can go into the main reading room and check out any book. I used to, when I worked for the Navy, was there all the time doing research for projects that we were working on, and just getting to sit in that giant reading room and have these carts of books come out from the center librarian stand. It's just, it's an awesome place to work. It makes doing work so much nicer when you're in that gigantic cavernous space. So yeah, I agree. Anyone, if you're in DC, go to the Library of Congress, and if you have time, try to get a library card and just go in the reading room and read something for like half an hour. You won't regret it.
Okay, if there are no other questions, why don't we go ahead and close it up? And I want to again, thank you again, Scott. And I know it's late there, but I really appreciate the time and all the extra time you've taken to answer the questions. It's just a great talk. And we look forward to seeing you when you're back in Coronado visiting. We would love to have you come by and by CHA and talk to us.
Oh yeah, I would love to. I bet that's what will get my mom to kind of pressure me to get back there sooner. So, but no, thank you to all of you. Thanks to Trisha as well for giving the presentation. I always love, I was in compliance before this, so I always love learning about new laws and new planning processes and stuff. So it was very interesting for me to get to know about, what was going on in my hometown that I was never aware of. And thanks to Vicky as well, who's been coordinating with me on all of this, and to everyone on the board and everyone that came and listened. So thank you guys for having me.
Thank you. And Trisha, thank you again for another great presentation. You're our permanent speaker, I think, for this as well, but I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's always fun to come talk, and I'm always available if anybody needs me.
Great. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Good night.